The world didn't notice it at first. Corporations started as small, local businesses, producing goods, providing services, and competing in markets. Over time, however, some companies grew larger than entire nations, not just in revenue, but in influence. By the late 20th century, multinational corporations had the ability to operate across borders with little interference from governments. This borderless nature gave them a unique form of power. They were no longer confined by laws, regulations, or political boundaries. With their massive budgets, these corporations could outspend countries on lobbying, marketing, and strategic acquisitions. Their supply chains spanned continents, and their products reached billions of people daily. Suddenly, they could shape economies, influence legislation, and even sway public opinion, all without holding a single elected office. The most striking example is the tech sector. Companies like Google, Amazon, and Apple moved beyond commerce to control information, communication, and infrastructure worldwide. Their platforms became essential to daily life, giving them leverage over governments who depended on these services. Even outside tech, corporations in finance, energy, and pharmaceuticals amassed unprecedented influence. They could negotiate tax breaks, dictate trade terms, and lobby for policies favorable to their interests. In some cases, these powers rivaled those of small or medium-sized countries. The real turning point was subtle. The moment corporations became so big they could not fail, and governments began to treat them as strategic partners rather than private entities. Today, their influence is woven into the fabric of global politics, economics, and culture. Nations may still have flags, armies, and constitutions, but corporations now wield an invisible power that often shapes the world more than any elected government ever could. Power is no longer measured solely by votes or borders. In today's world, CEOs often wield more influence than presidents, prime ministers, or entire legislatures. They shape laws, influence trade deals, and determine policies that affect billions of people, all without ever facing an election or public accountability. This shift didn't happen overnight, but it has quietly transformed how the world operates. Corporations discovered long ago that money translates directly into influence. Through lobbying, campaign contributions, and global networks, corporate leaders can shape legislation to their advantage. Unlike governments, which must answer to citizens and voters, CEOs answer primarily to shareholders, and their goal is profit, not public welfare. This allows them to pursue agendas that governments might avoid for political reasons. Consider the tech giants. Leaders at companies like Facebook, Google, and Amazon meet regularly with government officials, advising on policies that affect privacy, censorship, taxation, and infrastructure. Their recommendations often become law or regulation, despite the absence of democratic oversight. In essence, these executives act as shadow policymakers, quietly deciding how societies function. The phenomenon extends beyond tech. Energy corporations influence environmental policy. Financial institutions dictate banking regulations. Pharmaceutical CEOs shape healthcare laws and drug approvals. In every sector, corporate executives have found ways to steer national and international policies in their favor. The result is a subtle but profound shift. Governments increasingly operate in partnership with corporations, sometimes prioritizing corporate interests over citizens. The people elect leaders, but corporations often decide the framework within which those leaders operate. In this new reality, CEOs wield power that rivals or even exceeds that of elected officials, not through force, but through influence, capital, and strategic control. One of the most profound ways corporations have replaced governments is through the privatization of essential public services. In the past, governments were responsible for providing healthcare, education, transportation, utilities, and even public safety. Today, private companies increasingly fill these roles, not as supplements, but as primary providers. This shift has quietly transferred control over citizens' daily lives from elected officials to corporate executives. Healthcare is a prime example. Hospitals, insurance providers, and pharmaceutical giants dictate not only costs but also access to life-saving treatments. Decisions about what care is available, who can afford it, and which medications are prioritized are made in boardrooms, not legislatures. Education follows a similar pattern. Private institutions, online learning platforms, and corporate-sponsored curricula shape how knowledge is delivered, sometimes with agendas that align more with corporate interests than public good. Even transportation and infrastructure are affected. Toll roads, privatized railways, and urban mobility apps allow companies to control movement patterns, pricing, and accessibility, often with minimal government oversight. Utilities, too, from water to electricity, are increasingly managed by private corporations, sometimes prioritizing profit over equitable distribution. This shift has consequences beyond efficiency or convenience. Citizens become dependent on companies for services that were once considered fundamental rights. Access to essential systems is now often contingent upon wealth, credit, or subscription. Governments may retain the appearance of control, but the levers of influence, what services exist, how they are priced, and who benefits, rest firmly in corporate hands. Ultimately, the privatization of public life is a subtle form of power. Unlike armies or elections, it doesn't require force. It works through necessity, convenience, and dependence, making citizens beholden to entities that operate primarily for profit. In this new reality, corporations don't just influence governments. They quietly replace them as the decision-makers in daily life. In the 21st century, the most valuable resource isn't oil, gold, or even labor. It's data. Corporations, particularly tech giants, have discovered that by controlling data, they can control nations. Every click, purchase, search, and location ping feeds algorithms that shape behavior, predict trends, and ultimately influence economies and governments. This has created a new kind of dependency, one that mirrors historical empires, but without borders or armies, a digital colonialism. Tech companies operate platforms used daily by billions, from social media to payment systems, cloud infrastructure, and e-commerce. Governments rely on these platforms to maintain communications, manage services, and interact with citizens. When corporations control these essential digital pathways, they effectively hold the keys to modern life. Decisions about data privacy, access, and usage become matters of corporate policy, not democratic debate. The financial system is similarly entwined. Global corporations leverage advanced algorithms, high-frequency trading, and proprietary financial networks to dominate markets. Smaller nations and companies, unable to compete, often comply with rules set by these corporate giants, lest they face economic marginalization. The result is a modern form of colonialism. Instead of armies and colonies, dominance is achieved through digital infrastructure, financial networks, and informational control. This digital dependency extends to governance. Elections, public services, healthcare systems, and even national security rely on technologies owned by a handful of corporations. Their software dictates how societies function, and their influence grows with every transaction, click, and byte of information collected. In short, the world is becoming a landscape where corporations, rather than nations, dictate the rules. Data is the new territory, and control over it ensures influence over lives, economies, and governments alike. This is not just influence. It is a quiet, pervasive power that resembles colonial empires, only without the traditional trappings of flags and armies. The trajectory is clear. If corporations continue their current path, the world may soon be ruled not by countries, but by brands. Borders, constitutions, and elections will matter less than the power wielded by companies that control critical infrastructure, digital platforms, and essential resources. In this future, the entities that dominate commerce, technology, and information will effectively become the governing authorities. Corporations already influence global policies, economic strategies, and social norms. They dictate trade deals, shape environmental regulations, and control access to healthcare, education, and even financial systems. Citizens rely on corporate-controlled technologies daily: smartphones, payment apps, social media, cloud services, all of which collect and analyze vast amounts of personal and societal data. This creates a dependency where life without these platforms becomes nearly impossible. As AI, automation, and digital finance expand, corporations' reach will deepen. Algorithms will optimize not just business decisions, but also public services, resource allocation, and urban planning. In effect, companies will act as invisible governments, making choices that affect billions without public oversight. The shift is subtle but powerful. Unlike traditional governments, corporations are motivated primarily by profit, shareholder value, and market dominance, not public welfare. This raises profound questions about accountability, ethics, and individual freedom. Ultimately, the world is moving toward a system where brands wield more authority than flags, shaping society in ways we are only beginning to understand. Nations may exist in name, but corporations will increasingly write the rules that govern our lives, quietly replacing governments as the true power brokers of the modern era.